Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to cut through the noise and get straight to the insights that really matter.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving into a challenge I think we all face, right? In personal life, professional careers. It's making impactful decisions when you're just flooded with options and, staring down a tight deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever wondered why some small, almost insignificant choices made really early on end up having these massive, sometimes really surprising consequences way down the line?
It's a fundamental question, absolutely. And what's truly fascinating is how universally this whole principle applies.
Right.
It's not just about, what car you buy or where you decide to live. This core idea is at play in pretty much everything, planning a family vacation, even orchestrating multi-million-dollar industrial investments.
Wow.
So our mission today really is to sort of shine a light on that surprising, often counterintuitive relationship between the impact a decision has, the actual cost of making it, and, importantly, the accuracy of the information you have at different stages. We're basically going to show you how to be well-informed, but efficiently and effectively, cutting through all that complexity without getting totally bogged down.
And we're going to take you on a bit of a journey here to uncover this universal logic. What really fascinated us prepping for this deep dive was seeing how this one principle just echoed across wildly different scenarios.
Yeah, it's quite striking.
We'll start with some super relatable, everyday examples, and then we'll scale it right up to complex industrial situations, revealing this consistent pattern that hopefully you can apply to almost any big decision you're facing.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this then. A perfect everyday example straight from our sources. Building a house.
Mm-hmm.
Even for those of us, deep in complex projects, this simple scenario really nails the core principle. So imagine you're just starting out. Huge project. What's the very first, most critical step?
Well, the very first stage, even before you think about an architect or a specific blueprint, is defining the location.
Location.
The key info you need right then is the average price per square meter of land in the neighborhoods you're actually considering. It's about understanding the lay of the land, quite literally.
And how do you typically get that info? I mean, a quick Google search, right? Maybe chat with a local real estate agent.
Exactly.
What's the cost for that initial research? I mean, effectively, zero raise.
Yeah.
Or pretty close. Nothing out of pocket, really.
Pretty much zero. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite costing basically nothing, the impact of this single decision on the final house cost is incredibly high.
Really?
Yeah. A single square meter of land in, say, desirable neighborhoods can vary hugely. From maybe 100,000 to 300,000 rates. That's a massive range, underlines the impact.
Wow.
So roughly half, maybe, of the total project value that's the land plus the house gets implicitly set right there at that point, before you even know the exact street or what kind of house you're building.
That's incredible.
You're sort of committing to a financial bracket based on very little, very cheap information.
That's astonishing. Like half the potential cost lacked in with just a free Google search. But I mean, that sounds incredibly high stakes for such an early kind of informal step.
Yeah.
Are there pitfalls there making such a big decision with, well, so little formal investment?
That's a really good question. And the pitfall isn't really in the lack of formal investment. It's more in misunderstanding the leverage you have at that point.
Okay.
The key isn't to get way more detailed information right then, but to get the right information to just eliminate the unsuitable options quickly.
Right.
Like trying to get soil composition reports before you even know which neighborhood, that's just a waste of time and money. The real risk is more in ignoring this early decision point, or maybe just treating it as insignificant when it's actually foundational.
That makes perfect sense. So, okay, you've picked a neighborhood. What's the next big decision then that keeps shaping the project so profoundly?
Well, the second stage is defining the type of house itself. Are you thinking like a terrea, a single-story place, or maybe a sobrato, a two-story design? And what about materials? Traditional masonry, wood frame, or maybe even something more modern, like a metal container structure. Lots of options.
And again, how are you gathering this info? You're probably hitting YouTube for architect tips, right?
Yeah.
More Google searches for design ideas, maybe having that first chat with an architect just to brainstorm.
Exactly. And your research costs online are still basically negligible.
Still zero.
And that first consultation with an architect might be less than, say, 1,000 raise. A pretty minimal investment in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
Yet the impact on the final cost, still remarkably high. I mean, think about it. Deciding to go from, say, a 2-bedroom house to a 5-bedroom. That dramatically reshapes your whole budget.
Completely different scale.
Or choosing wood as the main material. Might seem cheaper up front for the build, but often comes with higher maintenance costs down the line compared to, say, masonry. These early choices, they really set the parameters.
So we're still in these incredibly early, really low-cost information gathering phases. But the decisions here are basically shaping everything that follows. What comes next as things get, closer to actual construction?
Okay, so after those foundational choices, you move into what's often called conceptual design, or the croquis phase.
Perfect. Yep.
This is essentially where the architect does quick sketches, broad strokes, focusing on the overall style, functionality, without getting bogged down in tiny details, just exploring ideas.
Right.
The cost at this stage, typically around maybe 1% of the total house cost.
Only 1%.
Yeah. And the impact is still, I'd say, medium to high, because big style changes or shifts in a room layout, they're still quite possible without undoing too much previous work.
Okay. Then we get into detailed design. This is where the civil engineer and architect really nail down the specifics, yeah. Like whether a door is exactly 0.9 or 1 meter wide, precise placement of light switches, that sort of thing.
Precisely. Now, the cost for this detailed design phase, it jumps quite a bit, maybe around 10% of the total house cost.
Okay, 10%.
But the impact of these decisions on the overall project, it's now surprisingly low. All the major cost-driving choices, the neighborhood, house size, general materials they're already made, you're just refining details now, not changing the fundamental structure.
And finally, stage 5, construction.
Nay.
Hiring the builder, materials show up, foundations get poured. This is the big one, cost-wise, no doubt.
Absolutely. Construction costs, they're like a whopping 90% of the total house cost.
90%.
Yeah. But at this point, the impact of any new decisions on the overall direction or cost is very, very low.
Right.
You're not suddenly deciding on the number of bedrooms or if it's 1 story or 2 anymore. That ship has sailed, basically. Trying to change a single-story house to a 2-story during construction. It's like deciding you want a second floor after the roof is already on.
Yeah, disaster.
Exactly. It means going way back to earlier, much cheaper design stages, and incurring just massive financial losses and major delays. So what this whole process really shows, I think, are 2 consistent trends. First, those decisions made right at the beginning, with minimal costs for info gathering, have this enormous disproportionate impact on the final project cost. And second, conversely, the most expensive stages, like detailed design and construction, actually have a surprisingly low impact on the fundamental direction or the total cost, which highlights that the less costly information you generate early on, while maybe less precise, is incredibly high leverage. It determines roughly half the total project value right there.
That's a really powerful lesson just from building a home.
Oh.
But if this logic is really universal, it should hold for other big life decisions too, yeah. Like choosing your next big vacation. Is it going to be like the culture of Salvador, the mysteries of Machu Picchu, or backpacking through Europe?
Absolutely, yeah. The same logic fits perfectly. You make the main decision, your destination, based on quick, mostly free information, right? Flight prices, average accommodation costs.
Right, the big ticket items.
Those are the things that really define the trip's budget and scope. The detailed itinerary, specific tours, restaurant bookings, local transport, that all comes much later.
Yeah.
It costs you time to research, sure, but it has almost zero impact on your initial fundamental choice of where you're going.
Yeah.
You wouldn't research every single restaurant in Paris before deciding if you're even going to Europe, would you?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious when you lay it out like that, but yeah, often we get caught up in those details way too soon. So, okay, shifting gears then. What does this all mean when we talk about large-scale industrial projects? I mean, surely with multi-million-dollar investments, it's a completely different ballgame. Different rules apply.
You'd think so, but not really. The exact same logic applies when businesses are making these massive investment decisions. The initial challenge for a company is often answering that fundamental question. Where should we strategically invest in the next few years to, grow or just stay competitive?
And the options there can be incredibly diverse, right? I mean, expanding an existing production line, maybe with several different technology choices, or building a brand new plant from scratch, or even launching a totally new product, maybe from renewable sources, which could have dozens of product and tech permutations.
Exactly. The complexity ramps up.
So if you're, say, a chemical engineer, you might get called in to evaluate all these numerous complex options. How do you even start to do that effectively and quickly without just drowning in detail you don't need yet.
Well, the research we looked at really highlights a clear three-step process for these industrial projects, and it mirrors our earlier examples quite closely.
Okay.
First, you quickly eliminate the non-promising options, just based on easily calculable high-level criteria. Get rid of the obvious non-starters.
Right. Filter them out.
Second, you take the remaining ones, maybe say 5 or so viable options, and you evaluate them with a bit more detail. And it's really crucial to remember here that detail directly translates to more time and higher engineering costs.
Okay.
And then finally, you only fully detail the project once the single most promising option has been selected and actually approved for a significant investment. This stops you from wasting huge resources on ideas that aren't going anywhere.
That second step, the conceptual project phase, sounds incredibly important then, kind of like the architectural sketches for the house, but for industry. What does that actually involve and why is it so strategic?
Yeah, that's where chemical engineers really come into play. In this conceptual phase, which sort of combines those first two steps, the broad screening and the initial evaluation projects are often represented using pretty simple block diagrams.
Okay, just blocks.
Yeah. Global mass and energy flows are calculated typically using spreadsheets like Excel, pulling data on conversion factors, yields, energy consumption from, the literature, scientific articles, technical reports, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's less common and frankly less efficient at this stage to use those really detailed process simulators like Aspen Plus, that specialized software for modeling complex chemical processes with high precision.
Why not? Wouldn't more detail be better?
Well, they're very time-consuming, and honestly, not every company has easy access to them or the trained personnel. Plus, the level of detail they provide just isn't that useful until much later when you've already narrowed things down significantly. It's overkill at this early stage.
Got it. And then, once that promising option is chosen, investment approved, the project moves into, I guess, deeper, more resource-intensive phases?
That's right. The next phase is typically called the basic project. Here, the main document that gets generated is the process diagram. Chemical engineers start deepening the detail significantly, creating what we call process and instrumentation diagrams, or P&IDs.
P&IDs.
These are highly detailed schematics. They show every piece of equipment, all the piping, all the critical control instrumentation, essentially the blueprints that guide construction and operations, crucial for safety and efficiency.
Right.
Following that, you get the detailed project phase. This is when engineers from all the other disciplines, civil, structural, electrical, really jump in.
The whole team comes together.
Exactly. They generate their specific diagrams, and you start seeing sophisticated 3D plant models being created to define the precise layout, exact placement of equipment, avoiding clashes, that sort of thing.
Okay.
After that, of course, comes construction and commissioning, building the plant, testing everything rigorously before you start running it, and then obviously the long life cycle of operation, and eventually, maybe decades later, decommissioning.
This really crystallizes the point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The lesson from building a house scales up perfectly. Those early conceptual phases, despite being the least expensive in terms of engineering hours, are where the most profound financial commitments are kind of unknowingly locked in for a huge industrial project.
Exactly. And this raises a really important question that our sources dig into. The fundamental trade-off that's illustrated by these project phases.
Which is?
Well, generating detailed information costs time and money, right? Especially engineering hours. But more detailed information does consistently lead to more accurate cost estimates. It's a direct relationship.
Okay.
So in the conceptual phase, your engineering costs are low, but as a result, the uncertainty in your cost estimates is quite high. For instance, a 100 million raise estimate for a plant at this stage. The actual final cost could realistically be anywhere from, say, 75 million up to 140 million raise.
Wow, that's a huge range.
Yeah, we call that an order of magnitude estimate. Very broad.
So, wait, we're essentially making these enormous investment decisions based on estimates with a pretty wide margin of error in this conceptual phase. That seems counterintuitive. I can imagine executives, balking at that uncertainty. How do you convince them this seemingly less precise approach is actually the smarter way to go?
It's a totally valid concern, and yeah, it sounds paradoxical, but it's actually very intelligent strategic engineering. It works precisely because those early engineering costs are so low. And because you can quickly eliminate many non-viable options using less detail, the approach becomes highly effective. It allows for a broad, rapid evaluation of numerous alternatives before you commit significant resources. Think of it like investing in a really efficient filter early on.
Okay, filtering.
Then, as projects advance into the basic and detailed phases, yes, the engineering costs skyrocket. We're talking potentially tens of millions of reais, but the accuracy of the estimates sharpens dramatically.
Right.
So, for example, that estimate might narrow down to plus or minus 20% in the basic phase, and then tighten even further to maybe plus or minus 10% in the detailed phase. This whole strategic approach ensures that the really expensive detailed engineering work is only ever performed on the most viable, thoroughly vetted options. It prevents incredibly costly pivots or changes way down the line.
That really makes you rethink how we often prioritize immediate detail over that strategic early thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost counterintuitive until you really break it down like this. And that, I guess, brings us full circle to our initial question. How do you evaluate many options effectively and quickly? The answer, as the research we look at makes crystal clear, is through highly effective but relatively low-cost conceptual projects.
Precisely.
So, okay, to summarize the core insight from our deep dive today, it seems the decisions you make right at the very beginning of any project, whether it's building your dream house, planning that perfect vacation, or launching a massive industrial plant, these early choices have an absolutely outsized impact on the final outcome and the final cost. And this holds true, even though those initial steps are often the least expensive in terms of actual time and money spent. It's all about leveraging those early high-impact decision points.
Exactly. And that leads us maybe to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Next time you're faced with a really big decision, what are the truly cheap early choices? The ones that will disproportionately shape your path. And critically, how can you make sure you're getting enough, but maybe not too much, information at each distinct stage? Think about where you can invest just a little bit of time and effort right up front to potentially save yourself massive headaches, extensive reworks, and significant costs much later on.
Yeah.
The biggest impact often comes from the smallest, earliest investments. It's something to really chew on.